She pointed at her mightiest warrior. "Beat him, human, and you earn my hand." The ship came out of hyperspace with a shudder that Jake felt in his bones. He stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Horizon, watching as the planet Aura Prime grew larger against the black canvas of space. It was a beautiful world, he had to admit. Red and gold clouds swirled across its surface, and 3 moons hung in orbit like jewels on a chain. But beauty was not why he was here. "Commander," came a voice from behind him. "We're receiving landing clearance from the Planetary Authority. They're assigning us a berth in the capital city." Jake turned to face his communications officer, a young woman named who had only been with the diplomatic corps for 2 years. She was nervous, he could tell. They all were. This mission was too important for anyone to feel calm about it. "Thank you," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Tell them we're honored by their welcome and will begin our descent shortly." She nodded and hurried back to her station. Jake watched her go, then turned back to the window. Somewhere down there, in a palace built from stone that predated human civilization by thousands of years, an empress was waiting for them. An empress who held the power to save humanity or condemn it to slow extinction. The Orans had ruled this sector of space for longer than humans had existed as a species. They were old, powerful, and proud. Their warriors had conquered dozens of worlds before they grew tired of war and settled into a kind of watchful dominance. They didn't need to fight anymore. Everyone knew what they could do if they chose to. And now humanity needed their help. Jake walked through the narrow corridors of the Horizon, nodding to crew members as he passed. The ship was small by galactic standards, barely 100 meters long with a crew of just 42 souls. It was all Earth could spare for this mission. Resources were tight, had been tight for years now. The collective was coming. Jake had seen the intelligence reports, had watched the recordings of fleets sweeping through systems and stripping them bare. They were a hive species, millions of minds working as one, and they viewed other intelligent life the way humans might view a field of wheat. Something to be harvested, something to be consumed. Earth's colonies were in their path. 7 million humans spread across 12 worlds, all of them vulnerable, all of them terrified. The Earth Defense Fleet was too small, too poorly equipped, too new to the galactic stage to stand against the alone. They needed allies, they needed the Orans. But the Orans didn't make alliances easily. They had to be convinced that a species was worth their attention, worth their protection. And Jake had been chosen to do the convincing. He found the rest of his diplomatic team in the briefing room, gathered around a holographic display of the Oran capital. There were 5 of them in total, not counting himself. Nate Cooper, his second in command, a tall man with gray at his temples who had served in 3 different colonial administrations. Lisa Monroe there, who probably knew more about Oran physiology than most Orans did. Ben Carter, their cultural specialist, who had spent 5 years studying Oran society from recordings and intercepted communications. Amy, their translator, though the Orans spoke perfect standard when they chose to. And the youngest of them, handling communications and logistics. "How are we looking?" Jake asked as he entered. "About as well as can be expected," Nate said, not looking up from the display. "The Orans have agreed to receive us, which is more than they've done for the last 3 species that came asking for help, but they haven't promised anything beyond a hearing." "That's all we need," Jake said, "a chance to make our case." Lisa cleared her throat. "Commander, there's something you should know. I've been going through the historical records trying to find precedent for Oran alliances. They're very rare. In the last 1,000 years, they've only formed 3, and all of those were with species that had something significant to offer." "What kind of significant?" "Military strength mostly, technology they didn't have, resources they wanted." Lisa shook her head. "We don't have any of that. Compared to them, we're practically primitive." "Then we'll have to offer something else," Jake said. "Something they don't know they want yet." Ben looked up from his notes. There might be another way. I've been studying their cultural practices, and there's an old tradition called the challenge of worth. If a species can't demonstrate value through conventional means, they can request a trial by combat. Win, and you've proven your worth. Lose, and he trailed off. And what? And nothing. You just lose, but at least you'd have their respect for trying. Jake filed that information away for later. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, but hope was a luxury he couldn't afford to rely on. The descent through Aura Prime's atmosphere was smooth, the horizon's shields deflecting the worst of the heat and turbulence. Jake watched from the bridge as the clouds parted and the capital city came into view. It took his breath away. The city was built into the side of a mountain range, its towers and spires carved from the living rock itself. Bridges of crystal spanned canyons thousands of feet deep, and waterfalls cascaded down from heights that would have killed any human who fell from them. In the center of it all, dominating the skyline, was the Imperial Palace, a structure so massive that it made everything around it look like toys. "They've been building this place for 10,000 years, Ben said quietly, standing beside Jake at the observation window. Every generation adds something new. It's not just a city to them. It's a monument to their civilization." "It's impressive," Jake admitted. "It's meant to be. The Orans believe that architecture is a form of strength. Build something beautiful, something lasting, and you prove that your species deserves to exist." The horizon settled onto a landing pad near the palace, its engines cycling down with a whine that echoed off the stone walls surrounding them. Jake took a deep breath, straightened his uniform, and prepared to meet the beings who would decide humanity's fate. The Orans who greeted them at the landing pad were exactly what Jake had expected from the recordings and reports. They stood 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in a natural armor of overlapping scales that shifted from gray to bronze as they moved. Each of them had 4 arms, the upper pair larger and more powerful, the lower pair smaller and more dexterous. Their faces were vaguely reptilian, with wide mouths full of sharp teeth and eyes that gleamed with ancient intelligence. But they weren't hostile. If anything, they seemed curious. "Welcome to Aura Prime," said the leader of the greeting party, a female whose scales had the deeper bronze color that indicated age and status. "I am Aura, voice of the Empress. You will follow me." It wasn't a request. Jake nodded and gestured for his team to follow. They walked through corridors that made the ones on the horizon seem like closets, past tapestries that depicted battles fought before humans had discovered fire, past statues of warriors and rulers whose names had been forgotten by everyone except the Orans themselves. Guards stood at regular intervals, their eyes tracking the humans with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Finally, they reached the throne room. Jake had thought the city was impressive. The throne room made the city look modest. It was a vast circular chamber, easily a quarter-mile across, with a domed ceiling that showed a real-time view of the stars above. Tiers of seating rose around the edges, filled with Oran nobility in their finest silks and jewels. And at the far end, raised on a platform of pure white stone, was the throne itself. And on the throne sat Empress. She was beautiful, even by the standards of her own species, even by the standards of a human who had never found alien forms attractive. She was beautiful. Her scales were a deep gold color, almost metallic, and her eyes were the purple of a sunset. She wore robes of living silk that seemed to flow around her like water, changing colors with every movement she made. But it was her presence that truly struck Jake. There was a weight to her, a gravity that seemed to bend the room around her. This was a being who had ruled for centuries, who had watched empires rise and fall, who had crushed rebellions and forged peace with equal ease. She was power incarnate, and she knew it. "Approach," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber without apparent effort. Jake walked forward alone, leaving his team behind. It felt like crossing an ocean. Every step seemed to take forever, and he could feel thousands of eyes watching him, judging him, finding him wanting. But he kept his head high and his stride steady. He would not show fear. He could not afford to. He stopped at the foot of the platform and bowed, not deeply, but with respect. "Your Radiance," he said. "I am Commander Jake of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. I come on behalf of humanity, seeking friendship with the Oran people." Studied him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable. "Humanity," she said at last. "A young species. You have been among the stars for only a few centuries. You have no great fleets, no ancient wisdom, no weapons that could threaten even our smallest outpost. Why should the Oran Dominion concern itself with you?" It was a test. Jake knew it was a test. Everything here was a test. "Because we are still here," he said. "Because every challenge that should have destroyed us has only made us stronger. Because we do not know how to surrender, even when surrender would be the wise choice. Because, Your Radiance, we believe that worth is not measured by what a species has, but by what it is willing to become." A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Jake couldn't tell if it was approval or mockery. "Pretty words," said. "We have heard pretty words before. They spoke pretty words when they came seeking our aid against the burning plague. We gave them ships and soldiers, and within a generation their species was extinct anyway. They spoke pretty words when they promised to trade their technology for our protection. We discovered later that their technology was stolen, and the true owners came to take it back with considerable violence." She leaned forward slightly. "Why should we believe that humans will be different?" "Because we're not asking for ships and soldiers," Jake said. "We're not asking you to fight our battles for us. We're asking for an alliance, a partnership between equals." Someone in the crowd laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Equals?" His voice was dangerously soft. "You think yourselves equal to the Oran Dominion?" "Not in power," Jake said quickly. "Not in history or technology or military strength, but in spirit, Your Radiance. In determination. In the will to survive and thrive no matter what the galaxy throws at us. In those things, yes, I believe we are your equals." The throne room fell silent, stared at him with those ancient purple eyes, and Jake had the uncomfortable feeling that she was looking straight through him, seeing every doubt and fear he had ever had. Then she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had found something interesting. "You are bold, human. I will give you that. Bold or foolish, perhaps both." She rose from her throne, her robes flowing around her like liquid gold. "Very well. I will give you the chance to prove your words. Tomorrow at midday you will appear in the arena of judgment. There you will demonstrate the worth of humanity in the only way that truly matters to my people." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Combat." "Combat confirmed. You will face a champion of my choosing. If you win, I will grant everything you have asked for and more besides. Your trade routes will be protected. Your colonies will be under Oran's shield, and to seal our alliance in the most sacred way known to my people." She paused, her smile widening. "I will take a human as my consort. You specifically, Commander, should you survive." The nobles erupted in shocked whispers. Jake heard the sharp intake of breath from his team behind him. He tried to keep his own face neutral, but inside his mind was racing. "And if I lose?" he asked. "Then you die, and humanity goes home to face the alone. A simple enough bargain, I think." She descended the steps of her platform, approaching him until she stood close enough that he could smell the strange, sweet scent of her perfume. "Do you accept?" Every instinct Jake had was screaming at him to refuse. This was suicide. He had seen recordings of Oran combat, had watched their warriors tear through opponents twice their size with their bare claws. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. His military training was basic at best, certainly nothing that would help him against an alien warrior who had spent centuries learning how to kill. But if he refused, humanity was doomed anyway. They would come, and Earth's colonies would burn, and 7 million people would die or worse. "I accept," he said. Smile became something almost genuine. Then rest well tonight, Commander. Tomorrow, you will either earn humanity's place among the stars, or you will die trying. Either way, it should be entertaining. She swept past him, her entourage falling in behind her, and Jake was left standing alone in the center of the vast throne room, wondering what he had just agreed to. The quarters assigned to the human delegation were comfortable enough, though everything was scaled for Iran bodies. The beds were too large, the chairs too high, the doorways tall enough to admit a small shuttle. Jake found it oddly appropriate. Everything about this situation made him feel small. His team gathered in the central room, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. Looked like she might cry. Ben was pale. Lisa was already pulling up medical files on her tablet, her expression grim. "What were you thinking?" Nate demanded. "You can't fight a Iran champion. You can't even fight a regular Iran. They'll kill you in about 3 seconds. Probably less," Lisa added helpfully. "Their reaction time is roughly twice as fast as ours, and their natural weapons are basically built-in swords. One good swipe and you're in pieces." "Thank you for that mental image," Jake said dryly. "I'm serious, Commander. The physiological differences alone make this impossible. They're stronger, faster, tougher, and they've been training for combat since before their first molting. You've had, what, basic military self-defense courses." "I was pretty good at them." "Being pretty good at basic self-defense is not going to help you against a being that can punch through steel." Jake sat down on one of the oversized chairs, letting his legs dangle over the edge. He was tired. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. The weight of everything was pressing down on him, and for just a moment he let himself feel it. "I know the odds," he said quietly. "Believe me, I know. But what was the alternative? Tell her no and watch humanity get conquered because we were too scared to try." "We could have negotiated," Amy said. "Offered something else, found another way." "There is no other way. Ben said it himself, the Orans only respect strength. If we can't show them we have it, they'll never take us seriously." He looked around at his team, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "I'm not saying I'm going to win. I'm probably going to die. But at least I'll die showing them what humans are made of. At least I'll give them something to remember." "That's very noble and extremely stupid," Nate said. "Story of my life." They argued for another hour, going in circles, but in the end there was nothing to be done. Jake had accepted the challenge, and Iran honor demanded that he face it. Backing out now would be even worse than losing. Eventually, Jake sent everyone to get what sleep they could. Tomorrow was going to be a long day, one way or another. But after they left, he stayed awake, staring at the alien stars through the window of his quarters. Around midnight, there was a soft chime at his door. Jake frowned and got up to answer it. He was expecting Nate, maybe, come to argue some more, or Lisa with more depressing statistics about his chances of survival. Instead, he found a Iran female standing in the corridor. She was smaller than most of her kind, though still a head taller than Jake, and her scales were a pale silver color that seemed to glow in the dim light. She was dressed simply, without the elaborate robes of the nobility, and her expression was not hostile. "Commander," she said, "may I enter?" Jake hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." She walked in, moving with the fluid grace that all Orans seemed to possess. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the disorder of tablets and papers that Jake's team had left behind, then settled on him. "You do not know me," she said. "My name is N. I am what you might call a historian. I study the species that come to petition the Empress, and I try to understand them." "And what have you learned about humans?" "That you are strange." She tilted her head, a gesture that Jake had learned indicated curiosity. "You are weak by galactic standards, yet you expand relentlessly. You have short lives, yet you build for the future as if you will live forever. You have every reason to be cautious and careful, yet you take risks that would make a Oran warrior hesitate. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Neither, it is an observation. She moved to the window, looking out at the same stars Jake had been studying. I watched you in the throne room today. You were afraid, I could smell it on you, but you did not show it. When the Empress offered you the challenge, every logical part of your brain must have been screaming at you to refuse, but you accepted anyway. I didn't have much choice. You had a choice. You could have said no, returned to your ship, gone home to your people. It would have been the sensible thing to do. And let humanity face the alone. N turned back to face him. Yes, that is what most species would have done. Self-preservation above all else. It is the first law of survival. She paused. But you chose differently. Why? Jake was quiet for a long moment. It was a good question. He had been asking himself the same thing since he left the throne room. Because it's not just about me, he said finally. It's not even just about humanity. It's about what we want to become. If we run from every fight, if we hide from every challenge, then what's the point of surviving? We'd just be existing, not living. And I'd rather die standing up than live on my knees. N studied him with those ancient eyes. You truly believe that? I do. Then perhaps I was right to come here tonight. She reached into her robe and produced a small data chip, which she pressed into Jake's hand. This contains information about the champion you will face tomorrow. His name is Or, and he has never been defeated in 432 matches. I am not supposed to give you this, but I find myself hoping that you will prove as remarkable as you seem. Jake looked at the chip, then back at her. Why? Because the galaxy is changing, Commander. They are not the only threat rising in the darkness. There are things coming that even the Oran Dominion will not be able to face alone. We will need allies, true allies, and that means we will need species who can do what we cannot. She moved toward the door, then paused. Study the chip. Learn everything you can. And tomorrow, when you enter the arena, remember that you are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for your entire species. Then she was gone, leaving Jake alone with the chip in his hand and a galaxy of questions in his mind. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the room's terminal and loaded the chip, beginning to study every piece of information it contained. Or the unbroken, 432 victories, champion of the Empress for 17 cycles. His combat style, his preferred techniques, his strengths and weaknesses. Actually, Jake noticed as he read through the files, or didn't seem to have any weaknesses. He was enormous, even by Oran standards, standing nearly 10 feet tall with a hide from countless battles. His forearms were each thick with muscle, and his claws had been sharpened to razor edges. He had fought opponents with weapons, with armor, with technology that should have given them every advantage, and he had killed them all. But Jake kept reading anyway. He watched recordings of Or's fights, dozens of them, playing them over and over until he could predict the champion's movements before they happened. And slowly, gradually, he began to notice something. It wasn't a weakness exactly. It was more like a blind spot. The Orans fought a certain way, all of them, a style that had been developed over thousands of years and had served them well against every opponent they had ever faced. They used their superior size and strength to overwhelm, to dominate, to crush. They fought to end battles quickly, to prove their superiority with as little effort as possible. But what would happen if you didn't let them do that? What would happen if, instead of trying to match their strength, you simply refused to be where their attacks expected you to be? Jake thought about human martial arts, about the techniques that smaller fighters had developed to defeat larger ones. Judo, Aikido, wrestling, all the disciplines that used an opponent's force against them. He thought about boxing, about the principle of slipping punches, of making your opponent miss and making them pay for it. He thought about persistence hunting, the oldest form of human predation. The way ancient humans had chased prey across savannas, not by being faster, but by being able to keep going long after the prey had exhausted itself. The way the human body was designed for endurance, for long-distance running, for surviving conditions that would kill most other species. The Orans were sprinters. They were built for explosive power, for quick, decisive victories, but humans were marathoners. It was a thin hope, barely more than a thread, but it was something. Jake kept watching the recordings until dawn broke over the alien city, taking notes, planning, preparing. He wasn't going to win through strength. He couldn't. But maybe, just maybe, he could win through something else. When Nate knocked on his door that morning, Jake was ready. "You look terrible," Nate said, eyeing Jake's disheveled appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. "Thanks, I feel terrible, but I also have an idea." "An idea?" "Come in, bring the others. I want to show you something." They gathered in his room, all 5 of them, their faces drawn with worry and lack of sleep. Jake pulled up the recordings he had been studying and began to explain. "Look at this," he said, pointing at a freeze frame of Orin mid-attack. "Every fight follows the same pattern. He charges, he attacks with maximum force, and he ends it as quickly as possible, usually within the first minute." "That's because he's devastating in the first minute," Lisa said. "Nothing survives it. Nothing that stands and fights survives it. But what if you don't stand and fight? What if you move?" He played a slowed-down version of one of the recordings, showing how Or's attacks followed predictable arcs, how his massive body committed fully to each strike. "See here and here. Once he starts an attack, he can't easily change direction. He's too big, there's too much momentum. If you're not where he expects you to be, he misses." "But he's faster than you," Ben pointed out. "Even if you dodge one attack, he'll just adjust and hit you with the next one." "If he's fresh, yes, but look at what happens in his longer fights." Jake pulled up another recording, a match that had lasted nearly 5 minutes against a particularly resilient opponent. "See how his attacks slow down. His species isn't built for extended combat. They expect to win quickly. When they don't, they get tired." "You're planning to outlast him." Nate's voice was incredulous. "I'm planning to survive long enough for his advantages to become disadvantages. Humans are endurance hunters. We can keep going long after other species would collapse. If I can dodge and weave and stay alive for long enough, he'll start to slow down. And when he does, maybe I'll have a chance." "That's the craziest thing I've ever heard," Amy said. "I know, but it's the only chance I've got." Jake looked around at his team. "I need your help. Lisa, I need you to identify every vulnerable point on an Oran body, every nerve cluster, every joint that could be exploited. Ben, I need you to study Oran's psychology, figure out how he'll react when his attacks start missing. And the rest of you, I need you to believe that this can work, because honestly, I'm not sure I believe it myself." They stared at him for a long moment. Then Nate nodded slowly. "All right," he said, "let's do this." They worked through the morning, preparing, planning, going over everything they could think of. Lisa identified 17 points on the Oran body, where a precisely placed strike might cause disproportionate damage. Ben outlined the psychological progression that Or would likely go through as a fight extended beyond his normal parameters. Amy helped Jake practice his movement patterns, calling out attacks and watching him dodge around the too large furniture of their quarters. By midday, Jake was as ready as he would ever be. The arena of judgment was even more impressive than the throne room. It was an open-air coliseum carved from the mountainside itself, with seating that could accommodate 100,000 spectators. Today, it looked like every one of those seats was filled. Jake walked out onto the crimson sand of the arena floor, feeling the weight of all those eyes upon him. The crowd murmured as he appeared, a sound like thunder rolling across the mountains. He could hear the skepticism in it, the mockery, the anticipation of watching another inferior species get crushed by their champion. Empress sat in the royal box, directly across from where Jake stood. She was dressed in even more magnificent robes than the day before, and her expression was one of patient amusement. Beside her sat En, the historian, whose face was carefully neutral. "People of the Dominion's voice rang out across the arena. "We are gathered to witness the challenge of worth. A human has come to us seeking alliance, seeking protection, seeking a place among the civilized peoples of the galaxy. Today, he will earn that place, or he will die." The crowd roared its approval. Commander Jake of Earth stepped forward. Jake walked to the center of the arena, his boots leaving prints in the sand. It was warm, he noticed. Not hot, but warm like blood. "You may choose any weapon from our armory," continued. "You may wear any armor we possess. I am not without mercy for the brave." Jake looked at the weapons rack that had been set up at the edge of the arena. Swords, axes, spears, energy weapons, things he couldn't even identify. Any of them might give him a slight advantage. Any of them might help him survive a few seconds longer. But that wasn't the point. "No armor," Jake said, loud enough for his voice to carry. "No weapons." The crowd fell silent, raised an eyebrow. "You refuse our generosity." "With respect, your radiance, I don't think they'd help much." Jake began to unbutton his uniform jacket, folding it neatly and setting it aside. "I'm not here to hide behind Iran steel. I'm here to show you what humanity is made of, and that means fighting as a human with nothing but what I was born with." Another murmur ran through the crowd. This time, it sounded less like mockery and more like genuine surprise. "Very well," said. "Then let the challenge begin. Bring forth the champion." The gate at the far end of the arena began to rise, and Jake felt his heart rate increase despite his best efforts to stay calm. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Or the Unbroken stepped into the arena, and Jake understood for the first time how truly outmatched he was. The recordings hadn't done the champion justice. In person, or was a mountain of muscle and scale and barely contained violence. His 4 arms flexed as he walked, each one capable of tearing a human apart with ease. His eyes found Jake across the arena, and they were empty of everything except hunger. He didn't speak, he didn't need to, his presence said everything. Jake settled into a loose stance, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and focused on the creature in front of him. Not on the fear, not on the odds, not on the consequences, just on the next few seconds. The gong sounded. Or charged. He crossed half the arena in the time it took Jake to blink, his massive body accelerating with terrifying speed. His upper right arm swept in a devastating arc, claws extended, aimed at where Jake's head was. Had been. Jake dropped, his legs folding under him, and the claws passed through empty air. He rolled to the side, came up already moving, and the champion's follow-up strike missed by inches. The crowd gasped. Or spun, faster than something so large had any right to be, and launched another attack. Jake wove between the strikes, not blocking, not deflecting, just not being where the attacks expected him to be. It was like dancing on the edge of a cliff, one mistake away from death, but somehow he kept finding the gaps. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Or's attacks came in waves, each one powerful enough to kill Jake several times over, and each one missing by smaller and smaller margins. The champion was adjusting, learning, trying to predict where Jake would go. But Jake was learning too, reading the subtle movements that preceded each strike, exploiting the commitment that Or's size forced upon him. 1 minute passed, then 2. The crowd had fallen completely silent. No one had ever seen anything like this. Or's opponents usually died in seconds. This human was still moving, still dodging, still refusing to be crushed. 3 minutes, 4. Jake was bleeding now, a cut on his forehead from a near miss, another on his shoulder from a claw that had come too close. His muscles burned with the effort of constant movement, but he was still alive, and more importantly, Or was starting to slow down. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but Jake had watched enough recordings to recognize the signs. the slight hesitation before attacks, the slightly wider arc of swings. The champion was getting tired and frustrated. "Stand and fight," or growled, speaking for the first time. His voice was like grinding stone. "Face me properly, coward." "I am facing you," Jake said, circling to the left. "I'm just not letting you hit me." The champion roared and charged again, but there was less speed behind it now, less precision. Jake slipped past a wild swing, ducked under another, and for the first time he struck back. It was a simple palm strike, aimed at a nerve cluster Lisa had identified on the inside of Or's lower left arm. It didn't do much damage, couldn't do much damage given the difference in their sizes, but it was contact. It was proof that the champion was vulnerable. And it made Or angrier. The next few minutes were the hardest of Jake's life. Or threw everything he had into his attacks, abandoning technique in favor of raw power. The arena floor shattered under missed blows. The air itself seemed to crackle with violence. Jake took more cuts, more bruises, his body screaming at him to stop, to give up, to accept the inevitable. But he kept moving. And slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. 15 minutes in, Or was breathing hard. His attacks came in bursts now, powerful but unsustainable, followed by moments of recovery that grew longer each time. His movements were sloppier, his aim less precise. The champion who had never known defeat was learning what it felt like to be exhausted. Jake saw his opportunity and took it. He went on the offensive, not with power but with precision. A strike to the knee that made Or stumble, a blow to the wrist that weakened his grip. Hits to the nerve clusters Lisa had identified, each one building on the last, exploiting the fatigue that the champion had never learned to handle. 20 minutes, 25. Or fell to one knee, his chest heaving. His claws scraped weakly at the sand as he tried to rise. Jake stood before him, swaying slightly, his body a patchwork of cuts and bruises. But he was standing. "Yield," Jake said quietly. "Please, I don't want to hurt you anymore." For a long moment, the champion simply stared at him. There was something in those eyes now that hadn't been there before. Not hatred, not anger, but something that looked almost like respect. Slowly, Or placed one massive hand flat on the ground, the gesture of surrender. The arena exploded. The sound was deafening, 100,000 Orans roaring their shock and amazement. Jake stood in the center of it all, barely able to believe what had just happened. He had won. Against all odds, against everything that should have been possible, he had won. Empress rose from her seat in the royal box, her expression unreadable. The crowd fell silent as she descended, walking across the arena floor toward where Jake stood. Her robes flowed behind her like liquid gold, and her eyes never left his face. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the individual scales on her skin, the depth of her purple eyes. For a moment, she simply studied him, as if seeing him for the first time. "In 6,000 years," she said finally, her voice soft enough that only he could hear, "no species has ever defeated my champion. Stronger species have tried, faster species, species with technology beyond your wildest dreams." She reached out and touched his face, her fingers surprisingly gentle. "How did you do it?" "Humanity," Jake said. "We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we don't give up, we adapt, we endure, we keep going when any sensible species would stop. And that is your strength." "That is our strength." Was quiet for another moment. Then she smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, warm and almost tender. "I named my price," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I shall honor it. The alliance between humanity and the Oran Dominion is sealed. Your colonies are under our protection. Your trade routes are open. And as for my hand—" She paused, and Jake felt a strange flutter in his chest. "I believe we should begin with dinner," she said, "and see where the stars take us." The crowd erupted again, this time with what sounded like approval, maybe even celebration. Behind him, Jake heard his team shouting, cheering, hugging each other. He saw Anne in the stands, her face split by a rare smile. He saw or being helped to his feet by his attendants, the champion looking at him with something that might have been the beginning of friendship. And in that moment, Jake understood that humanity's place in the galaxy had changed forever. They weren't prey anymore. They weren't children to be or ignored. They were something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. They were worthy. And that was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Jake would learn that they had heard of what happened on Aura Prime, that they had reconsidered their plans for human space, that the rumors of a species that could defeat the undefeatable had spread through a dozen star systems. He would also learn that was as interesting as she was beautiful, and that Orion courtship rituals were surprisingly similar to human ones, though with more ritual combat and fewer flowers. But that's another story. For now, Jake stood in the arena of an alien world, surrounded by the cheering of a species that had just learned to respect humanity, and he let himself feel hope for the first time in years. Humanity had a future, and he had helped earn it.